to Books and Ideas, the podcast where we talk with interesting people from a wide variety of fields. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell, and today we'll be talking with writer Sarah Werner from Girl in Space and the Right Now podcast. I discovered Sarah's work last year when I attended PodFest in Orlando, Florida, and I'm excited to be sharing it with you. As always, you will find complete show notes and links on our website at booksandideas.com, or you can send me feedback at docartemis@gmail.com. You can also send me voice feedback via speakpipe.com/docartemis. Usually I have closing remarks at the end of every interview, and I know that some of you don't listen to these, but today there's a special bonus content after the closing remarks, so be sure to listen all the way to the end. Okay, so Sarah Rhea Werner, welcome to Books and Ideas.
Thank you, Ginger. I'm really delighted to be here.
I usually start out by asking people to tell me a little bit about themselves, and I realize that's kind of a vague question. So what I had in mind is learning a little bit about how you got into both podcasting and writing in whatever order you want to talk about it.
Well, perfect. Gosh, well, they're intertwined for me, and I think they're probably intertwined for a lot of people. Or if you're a creative person or a creator in general, all of your creative things tend to be intertwined. I started off as a writer. Back when I was born, there was probably no podcasting. There was radio and ham radio and all of that good stuff, but no podcasting yet. So I grew up with a love of books and writing, and sort of took that with me throughout my youth, majored in English at college, like a lot of people do. See, it's all very boring and very traditional. But then we get to the part where I decide that I'm going to start a blog, like many, many people. And this was probably in about 2011 or 2012. And I was doing this blog. It was for writers, and I wanted to capture the writing experience. I wanted to capture not necessarily what the different techniques and things were for writers, because I think there were a lot of things out there already about, oh, here's how to construct sentences and here's how to use symbolism and develop a theme. But I wanted to have a blog that focused on here's what life is like as a writer, and here's what to do when you don't understand what success needs to mean for you, or here's what to do when you don't feel like getting out of bed and writing, or here's what happens when this and this and this happens. So I wanted to sort of document the writer's journey, and I did that in my blog, and I would spend hours crafting these blog posts, and then nobody would ever read them. Part of this is probably my own poor attempts at marketing, but also the blogging space was fairly flooded at the time, and it continues to be this day. And so I had a good friend who was working with me at the time. I was working for a digital marketing company, and my good friend Peter said, hey, you should really be podcasting. If you want to reach new people in a new way, he's like, you have a great voice, and I feel like you'd have fun doing it because you love to talk, which I took as a compliment. And so he said, start a podcast. And so 2013, I started putting together ideas to turn my blog into a podcast. Thus, the Right Now podcast was born. It came out in, I want to say 2014 or maybe early 2015. I'm now up to over 100 episodes, and it's really funny that writing about writing never really kicked off my writing career, but podcasting about writing really kicked off both my podcasting and my writing careers. And so it's just been an adventure since then. Podcasting has opened up all sorts of opportunities for me. I've been able to speak at conventions. I've been able to speak with people and interview people for my show who I would never have gotten to talk to, I think, if I would have just had a blog. I guess eventually, once I was fairly comfortable with nonfiction podcasting, I am always up for a challenge, and I decided to try fictional podcasting. I decided that I wanted to do something science fiction-y, and was just thinking one day when I was doing an episode of the Right Now podcast, what if I was just here telling lies? What if I was saying like, oh, here I am in space and I'm having a great time? And that's sort of where the Girl in Space fictional podcast came from. And again, that sort of took off just like my writing podcast did, because it's a relatively new medium and people are looking for fictional experiences just in audio. I feel like I had good timing in both of those quadrants. That's not the right word to use, but I feel like my timing was pretty fortuitous. And that's how I got to where I am today. In a month exactly, I'll be celebrating 2 years being self-employed. So I did leave my marketing job to podcast and write full time. And I'm very happy I was able to do that. Very grateful for the circumstances that have lined up to let me do that. That's kind of how I got to where I am. I still write every day. I still encourage people to write every day, create every day, whether I'm writing tweets or working on Girl in Space or another novel or any of that stuff. Okay, I think I'm done rambling now.
Well, obviously we met at PodFest. I guess was it last year?
Yeah, it was 2017, PodFest 2017.
I think, yeah, probably 2017. Anyway, you actually had a booth. I actually woke up the other day thinking, I wonder if a booth would be a good idea. But I'll ask you about that later. At any rate, I was drawn to your work because it reminded me of my hero in podcasting, Mur Lafferty.
I love her.
Yeah. And she was the person who inspired me to have 2 podcasts from the very beginning, because she had Geek Fu Action Grip, which is long gone, but also I Should Be Writing, which I think is still going. She was my inspiration. And so when I saw that you were doing both fiction and nonfiction about writing, I was like, that intrigued me. So I want to ask you about Girl in Space. You can give the listeners who don't know anything about it just a synopsis, but I'm really curious about the character who is so sciencey, and it sounds like your background isn't science.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, okay. You and I are really similar. And I also love that you brought up Mur Lafferty, because when I was first starting to get ideas for the Right Now podcast, I was looking for role models. I was looking for people to model my show on, and I found I Should Be Writing, and I fell in love with it. So I love that you brought her up and brought up her show. I don't actually know the word for it. I don't know if it's polymath or multi-passionate or what have you. I love everything. I love writing, but I actually wanted to be a chemist for a while growing up. I wanted to be a researcher or do something with chemistry or math. I had always scored relatively highly. I don't think that's grammatically correct, but we'll go with it. The math side of standard aptitude tests and all of that stuff. So yeah, no, I've always had a love of not only science, but mostly the natural world. My dad would always take me to the Natural History Museum where I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and we would just spend hours looking at, I feel bad now because those poor taxidermied animals and the animal bones and everything, but I had such a deep fascination. We would go to the botanical gardens and the arboretums, and I would want to know the names of absolutely everything. We had one of those books where you look up the leaves and the bark and you can tell what tree it is. And that was just really special time that I was able to spend with my dad. That stayed with me all these years. And I'm in my office right now. And I think I counted at one point, I have over 27 plants here in my office just because I love growing things. I love nurturing things, but also I love having some of the natural world in my workspace. And so it's still something that fascinates me. That relates to Girl in Space, which is my audio drama, audio fiction podcast, which is about, as you can probably tell from the title, a girl in space. She is abandoned on a research station named the Kavatica, and you're not 100% sure why she's out there or why she's alone, what happened to the other people on the ship with her. And you're not 100% sure what that light is that's slowly coming toward her in the distance. Her name is X, as you find out a few episodes in, just the letter X, and that has its own explanation as well. But X has been living on this spaceship alone. She does have the glass house, which is one of the pods on the ship, which is full of natural life. And she has a sort of solar-powered electrical setup going. And she has different things that she's farming and eating and composting, making her own sort of little ecosystem to live in. And I'm really fascinated with the idea of things growing in a vacuum, things growing in space, and things flourishing in space. And so I just kind of wanted to play around with those ideas. So that's where a lot of the science comes in. I do have to point out, I have two sort of scientists who I bother a lot with my questions. The first one is my sister, Rachel, who's a pharmacist, who tells me all of the medical stuff that I'm doing wrong. And then my good friend, Dr. Michelle Booz, has taught me so much about epigenetics and biology, and of course the botany I got from my dad. So I have a lot of scientist helpers and role models that I get to lean on for some of the more technical aspects of the show.
So now that you've told me this, it really makes X make more sense to me, because I can see X has this really special relationship with her father, even though he's gone. I can see where that comes from. And then there's the demented, I don't know if she's a robot or artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
She's an important character.
Yeah.
Charlotte?
Yes.
Does she have an inspiration?
Both of them. Okay, I have to back up and laugh a little bit. Everything I write, and I think that everything that most writers write, is at least in some part autobiographical. And so, yes, I was very, very much inspired by my own father and our sort of adventures into nature when I was really little. Charlotte, the AI, is sort of the mother figure in Girl in Space. And like you said, demented, I think, is a good word to use for her. And she's sort of based on perceptions of imperfect parents. And I love my parents, and everybody loves their parents, big blanket statement, but at the same time, nobody's perfect. And so I wanted to explore what it would be like to have a very naive character, because X is very naive, not having had a lot of exposure to the outside world. And so she has her father, who's this very nurturing, sweet figure. And then she has this mother figure represented by this AI who is very cold, calculating, who uses X, as you later find out in some of her experiments, without X's knowledge or consent. And I kind of wanted to play around with our expectations of parents, and then even what those gender roles look like, having the father be the nurturing one and the mother sort of being the cold, calculating one. Again, not based on my mother. I'd like to point that out. I love you, Mom. She does tend to be a little bit more on the sciencey side. She's a little bit more mathematical, calculating, and all of that good stuff, and I admire her for that. And actually, fun fact, Charlotte the AI is actually voiced by my mother-in-law, Kay Krause, who very, very wonderfully agreed to voice the evil AI when I asked her if she would lend her voice to the show. So there's a lot of family connections there. A lot of my own story is wrapped up in this story. I think Stephen King said that every character you create is partially you, and that's absolutely true.
So you chose an audio drama, which is obviously technically more difficult than just reading your work. Would you talk a little bit about that and maybe tell us a little bit more about some of the other cast members, give them some credits?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I had no idea what I was getting into. And that was true when I started the Right Now podcast. It was even more true when I started Girl in Space, because I thought I knew what podcasting was. I thought I knew. I thought I had it down. I was like, okay, I can expect about 15 hours for an episode. That's fine. I'll just record it, edit, put some music and sound effects in it. It's going to be great. It is a lot more work than that. I usually spend about 60 to 80 hours on an episode. My more recent episodes, I've been just doing tons and tons of rewrites of them. I'm on draft number 8 right now of episode 13. I work on it every day, and it's just taking so much of my time, and it's so much more time intensive than my nonfiction show. So I guess I just want to say I didn't know what I was getting into, but it is absolutely worth it. Similar to nonfiction podcasting, fictional podcasting or audio dramas, the space is wide open right now. There are a lot of people looking for fictional podcasts and just listening to the same ones over and over again. I see that a lot on social media, on Tumblr and Twitter. Every day I see, hey, does anyone have any podcast recommendations? Does anyone have any audio fiction or audio drama recommendations? And I don't want to say like hundreds of mentions a day for Girl in Space, but I get a lot of mentions every day from people recommending, just because there's so many listeners out there hungry for fiction, and you can only listen to the black tapes 20 times before you start to memorize it. So you want new stuff. And then you had also asked about my other cast members, and it's actually kind of funny. I do everything remote. So you'll see some audio drama creators get their cast around a table and everybody has a microphone and they do table reads and they go through the script and everybody has this great chemistry working off of each other. My cast is remote, which means that I'm here in South Dakota and I record all of X's lines. And then I ask everyone else, once I send out the script, to send me back their lines. And then I edit them all together so that it sounds like we're in a room together, kind of. I don't know if I would recommend doing it that way. This is just the way that worked out for me with the logistics that I have to work with. And I've actually only met a few of my cast members in person. I've actually never had a conversation with the actors who play Captain Miles Chen or Chance, and the actors' names are Lincoln Donovan and George Tolanis, respectively. The person who voices Thor is actually one of my coworkers from when I was in the marketing space. Her name is Tamara Parliament. But yeah, my mother-in-law, obviously, I know in person. But everybody else has just been voices who I've heard in other podcasts, and I've contacted them via Twitter or Facebook and just said, hey, I'm looking for a voice. Would you like to be in my show? And usually we'll do an exchange so that, and that's something I also tell people, if you're looking to start an audio drama and you can't really afford to pay hundreds of dollars for actors, make sure that, you're giving something back. So I act in their shows and they act in my show, and it works out, I think, pretty well.
I'm going to break in now to remind you that I need your help to reach more listeners. One way you can help is by posting a review in iTunes. I know this is kind of a hassle, so if you send me a screenshot of your review, I will send you an Amazon gift card. Just send it to docartemis@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to like the Books and Ideas fan page on Facebook. Have you ever, because the thing about the shelf life of things, you may not have ever heard the podcast Buffy Between the Lines, because Buffy's been off the air for a long time.
Oh, I love Buffy, though.
But did you ever hear Buffy Between the Lines? I
haven't.
So
no, I need
see if
to.
you can find it, because it's probably hidden in iTunes somewhere. I'm actually in 2 episodes, and I think I die in both of them.
That's awesome.
I get to play Anya's mother and the mayor's wife.
Ooh. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to have to check this out.
But I think it was, at least back then, that was probably the 2008, 9-ish period. It might have been more common to do this remote thing than... So don't feel like you just have to have everybody, for anybody else that's dreaming of doing this. And it's also interesting to me that you're talking about people really looking for fictions, because some of the original pioneers of podcasting, Scott Sigler and Mur Lafferty, to name just 2, were fiction writers. In fact, Scott was considered the guy who really got things going, because he had a book deal with a mainstream publisher that basically fell through when his publisher got bought by a bigger publisher. So he started, and he still podcasts regularly, so if you haven't ever listened to him, his genre is kind of a cross between hard sci-fi and horror. It's actually very unusual.
Oh, does he do Leviathan?
I think he did do Leviathan.
Okay, then I know that one. I don't know any of his other work, but that's a classic.
Yeah, he's had a couple of books that made it to the New York Times bestseller list. But, he was one of the pioneers, and basically in the early days of podcasting, there were a lot of fiction people in the space. And I think that, with sort of the larger space being a little bit now dominated by the NPRs and the Oprahs and these bigger players, it's become harder to find this. Also, there was a site, it may have shut down, called Podio Books.
Oh, yeah, I haven't heard of that.
And it was founded by some of the early podcasters, and people would put their books in sort of a serial form like what you're doing, only they would put it on Podio Books. You could get it in iTunes, but you could also get it in other ways. And the whole idea was the listener would pay whatever they felt was fair.
Oh, I like that idea.
I think the guy who originally founded it, who was Evo Terra, moved on. He's kind of a serial entrepreneur, so he wasn't going to stay there. So I don't know what happened to Podiobooks, but that would be the place. I mean, that's where Murr's Heaven and Hell series were, and most of her other work before she became a mainstream writer. So it might be interesting to look and see. I know that Evo sold Podiobooks, but I don't know what happened to it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm going to be looking that up after our conversation.
The people at Podcast Movement say, we want to nurture the fiction community, but then they sort of seem to have forgotten that there was an original fiction community before Welcome to Night Vale or whatever the name of that show is, and way before Serial. A lot of the early podcasts were fiction.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I'm not sure, I can't speak to why they maybe didn't catch on if podcasts were still too specific to a certain type of hardware, if podcasts were too specific to the original, the iPod.
For somebody like Scott Sigler, who already had a book deal, one of the issues early on was that the publishers were afraid that if you published your stuff as an audio and you gave it away for free, then nobody would buy it when it became a book. And Scott proved that that wasn't true because he had such a huge following, he could get people to buy his books on day one and make them bestsellers. He basically proved that you could podcast your work and still sell it because your fans would be loyal enough that they would buy it. But this is a lesson that seems to have, again, been forgotten.
It really has. And you see it all the time, too, even in the book world with, if I give this away for free, nobody will buy this. And it looks at who's cannibalizing whose audiences. And it's a huge, weird conversation. I kind of want to say that more writers are looking at audio now because TV is looking at audio for ideas. You have TV deals for the Black Tapes and Tanis and the Bright Sessions and all of these other things going on. And so I don't know if that's drawing more writers to the space and thus we're getting more fiction now, or if there's something like splits between rights, if authors are deciding that hey, I can sell my rights to my book and keep the rights for the podcast and do this and do this. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's booming now other than it just them being a little bit easier to access and having a little bit more of, I don't even want to say a mainstream following online because it's still not mainstream, but it's a little bit more known.
Yeah, it's a lot different than it was. When Scott and Murr were inducted into the first class of the Hall of Fame, which I guess was in 2014 or 15, I can't remember which, it was kind of sad because the people there didn't even know who they were.
Oh, gosh.
It was a good thing they were there together so they could sort of keep each other company because it was really pitiful.
My gosh.
Yeah, for a field that is as young as podcasting, since it basically began in 2004, the people in the space have incredibly short memories. I mean, there's really no reason why you couldn't know the entire history of podcasting since it's so short, but people don't.
And I wonder why that is. I mean, I have so many questions now. I want to figure out what's going on here and who's telling the history, maybe part of it, who's in control of that narrative.
Well, NPR wants us to think they invented podcasting. I don't know really what that's about since all they actually do is repurpose radio, but...
Yes. You can't see me, but I'm nodding.
Yeah, when I first started, I wanted to be discovered by NPR, and I decided that I can't afford it.
I want to hear more about that.
Well, because I figure if they discovered me, they would probably want to pay me dirt. Mm-hmm. If I'm producing independently, I have, I don't make a lot of money. I'm not ready to give up the day job, but then I'm a little spoiled. So you're also helping people learn to podcast now? Is that your latest?
It is, yeah. And I hope that it's helping. I love teaching. I love sharing what I know. I feel like if you learn something, you need to share it. It's your duty to share it. It's your duty to help other people learn and grow and maybe avoid the mistakes that you made. And so I've been writing about podcasting and giving talks about podcasting. And then recently I launched a course about podcasting. It is a giant mammoth of a course. It is completely comprehensive. It's called Podcast Now, and it's a masterclass. And there are 52 videos that walk you through absolutely everything you need to know. And I kind of start with a strategic foundation. I have 10 years in marketing and marketing theory and marketing strategy and all of that stuff. And so I'll walk people through, hey, here's how you make your branding guide. Here's how you have a vision and follow through with it. Here's how you set goals and metrics that matter and that will actually delineate success for your show. And then I'll go through all the specifics. Here's the kind of equipment that you need for each type of budget, including a budget of 0. Here's how you make show art. Here's where you need to be on social media. Here's how you join communities. And then here's how you create your RSS feed, and here's how you launch, and then here's what you do after you launch. It's a very large course, but I'm offering it 3 times a year in, let me see if I can remember this properly. I want to say February, June, and October. And if you're interested, you can check out Podcast Now, the masterclass on my website, which is sarahwerner.com.
I'm really glad to see a woman entering this space because, honestly, there's been guys doing this same thing since the beginning, except for Tips from the Podcasting Masters, which was one of the early books co-authored by Murr Lafferty and Rob Walsh. Almost everything in the space has been by men. So I think that's good. Of course, Libsyn also has great tutorials that happen to be hosted by a woman named Crystal at Libsyn, who's really fantastic also.
I learned a lot from Crystal at Libsyn. And you know what? Sometimes if I get stuck, I still learn a lot from Crystal. So I'm very appreciative that she's there.
I'm very loyal to Libsyn because their customer service is so good. They've never let me down.
No, me neither. And I recommend them to every podcaster. It's just, I feel like they're the gold standard.
Yeah. And even if you're on a teeny weeny budget, I don't think the place to cheat is by going to a free host. You're going to regret it. I could say something more colorful, but I'm just going to say you're going to regret it.
I would agree with that. I think you get what you pay for. And it's, I think, $5 a month. And hopefully if you give up a cup of coffee or something during that month, you'll thank yourself later.
So tell me about what else you're working on from the writing standpoint. Making all those videos must have been a monster, but I guess you've got that done. So now, of course, I wish you would just get Girl in Space out more often, but...
Oh, I know, me too.
My only complaint with Girl in Space is that the episodes are too far between.
I agree with you. And so I'm working on writing, well, oh my gosh. So I'm a pantser. And those of you out there listening who are writers, you either kind of tend to be a planner or a pantser. So you either plan things and you outline them and you know what's going to happen in chapter 3 and you know how the story is going to end and what the climax is going to be. Or you're like me and you fly by the seat of your pants and you're like, well, maybe I'll have this happen now. That's unfortunately the style of writer that I am, which is part of the reason that it's taken me so long to write these episodes. Funny enough, episode 12 was originally supposed to be the finale and I got to the end of it and I was like, well, that's not how I want it to end. That's not very exciting or interesting. So I was like, well, there'll be a 13th episode and that'll be the finale. And so that's what I'm working on right now because I don't plan ahead. If you're thinking about creating an audio drama, plan ahead. You'll thank yourself later for it and your fans won't be waiting for 2 or 3 months between each episode.
Once you finish Girl in Space, you got something else you really want to write?
Yes, I do. I have several projects that I'm really excited about. First and foremost is I am writing a Girl in Space novelization. So there will be a book. I'm still not sure how that's going to come out yet. I'm in talks with a publisher right now, but I also might do the self-publishing thing. I'm not really sure which way I'm going to go on that, but the book is coming. So I get to work on that this year, which is really fun. I have season 2 of Girl in Space that will be coming out. My little idea journal is full of cool things that are going to happen to X and her friends in season 2. I also have another audio drama that I have been I call it crock-potting. It's just been sort of stewing around in my brain. I haven't done any creation for it yet, but I've had a lot of fun thinking about it. And it's going to be speculative fiction. It's going to be a little bit more of not necessarily urban fantasy so much as urban magic realism. There's going to be some weird science. There's going to be some kind of fun, fantastical elements. And it's going to center on a I don't know how much I want to give away, but several siblings who are dealing with something with a capital S.
That's good enough. Well, whatever you do with the novelization of Girl in Space, I would highly recommend that you plan for the audiobook. The funny thing is, I did an ebook, 9 years ago now, off of like 2 episodes of Brain Science. And you would be surprised at how many people asked me for the audiobook version of it, even though it's actually just 2 episodes of the show.
Interesting. Oh my gosh.
Don't assume that just because you've already done the audio drama, you shouldn't do an audio book.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, so just a thought there. Also, I agree with whichever friend of yours that said you have a great voice.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I love to listen to Mer read her own work. If you can do that, it's an extra strength. Not everybody can do it.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
So what else would you like to share before we close, Sarah?
Well, I kind of want to ask you, what would be most helpful? Is there any sort of advice or anything that I can tell you or share with your listeners?
Tell us a little bit about Right Now, what kind of show it is. I mean, I know it's a show about writing. Is it about fiction writing like Mer's, or is it more about writing in general, guest-driven?
So the Right Now podcast was my first podcast, and I sort of created it to help writers find the time, energy, and courage they need to pursue their passion and write every day. And I started it in a state of, I never pronounce this correctly, naivete, perhaps. The show has been going for about 4 or 5 years now, and it's a little bit different than other writing shows like You Should Be Writing, which is Mer Lafferty's show, or Brandon Sanderson's show, or sort of any of the other ones out there, because I talk about the heart of a writer, and I talk about what it means to exist in the state of being a writer, not necessarily so much how to develop themes or how to do things like that, but really, what does the journey of a writer look like? How do we develop as human beings? What do we need to be doing to find success? You know, how much should we be reading? How do we fit reading into our schedules? When I started it, I was working more than 40 hours a week, we'll put it that way. And I also had a family life that I wanted to keep intact. And I was just wondering, how do we balance a passion project when we're already struggling to balance work and life? And so I set out in my very naive state to find the work-life writing balance, which, as it turns out, does not exist. Well, it can exist depending on what sort of scale you're putting it on, but I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. So basically, that's how the show started. And eventually, I did a spin-off show. There is a spin-off where I interview writers, and that's called Coffee Break. You can find those in the same RSS feed as the Right Now podcast. I interview a lot of cool people. I have Alan Alda. I got to speak with him for the show. Ginger Campbell, a lot of writers who I really admire, I got to speak to for the show, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. So it's just been fantastic. The show is for writers or any sort of creative who's sort of struggling to fit creativity into their life. I look at creativity as sort of an act of self-care, putting balance into your life. And so, yeah, if that sounds appealing to you, check it out. It's available everywhere. And I think there's actually several podcasts out there called Right Now, but mine is the original, and I'm proud of that.
So it sounds like there's a book there.
Yes, there is a book there. I just haven't written it yet.
Before I discovered podcasting, I was an aspiring writer. So I have many books on my shelf about writing. One of my favorites is called something like Wrestling with Your Angels, right?
Oh, I haven't heard of that one.
I'll have to find the right title for you and send it to you. The funny thing was that when I discovered podcasting, I realized that for me, podcasting is my medium. Mm-hmm. And so then trying to turn around and turn anything I'm doing into writing is hard. Like, I've got so much material from Brain Science. I could write, a book a year if I just had any motivation. Uh-huh. If you wrote a book about the heart of the writer, I'd buy it in 3 seconds.
Okay. I love this. And I'd never really thought about it that way until I talked to you about it on the show. So I will include you in the dedication when I write this book. I'll have to thank you.
Well, tell me about what it's like to be in South Dakota, because I don't know anybody from South Dakota.
They say after a while that you develop prairie eyes and it no longer looks like a big empty scrubland. And you know what? That's true. I've been here for just a little over 10 years and I've really grown to appreciate South Dakota. It's a little more difficult to do right now because we've just had immediately 2 feet of snow that melted while we got 3 days worth of rain. And so the city that I live in is extremely flooded right now. And I hope there's not too much white noise in the background of this recording because we do have a whole bunch of fans going in our basement, which currently has about 2 inches of water in it. So that's my South Dakota experience right now. It's not fantastic, but I do love living here. I spent most of my life in big cities. I grew up in Cleveland, and then I lived for a time in Chicago. And just living here in this smaller city, when I go to bookstores or restaurants, I see people I know, and it's really delightful. And the people here are very, very nice. And there's, of course, plenty of independent coffee shops, so I don't have to worry about being non-caffeinated. So it's been a fantastic experience. It's just a little out of the way.
So South Dakota, isn't that where Kathleen Norris lived? Do you know the writer Kathleen Norris?
I feel like I should, but I don't.
I don't know that she's ever written any fiction. I think her stuff is spiritual autobiography from a different phase of my life.
I'm writing her name down right now so I can check her out.
She's just the only writer from South Dakota that I've ever heard of. Sarah, I've really appreciated you taking the time to talk with me.
Ginger, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show and for this lovely conversation. I cannot wait to go and start my new book now. So thank you again for inspiring me. This has been a delight.
I really enjoyed talking to Sarah Werner, both about her writing and podcasting, and I'm excited to see where her career is going. If you're interested in learning about her new program for learning how to podcast, be sure to follow this up by the links that I have in the show notes at booksandideas.com. I'm going to close this episode with the trailer for Girl in Space, because I hope you will give it a try. As I mentioned before, I would love to hear from you, so be sure to send me feedback at docartemis@gmail.com or voice feedback at speakpipe.com/docartemis. Or you can post to the Books and Ideas fan page. Please do share Books and Ideas with others, and don't forget to send me a screenshot of your iTunes review so that I can send you an Amazon gift card. Books and Ideas will be back on the 15th of next month. But in the meantime, I hope you'll check out my other podcasts, Grain Rainbows and Brain Science. Thanks again for listening.
This probably isn't really worth noting, but during my final radiation tests of the day, I saw a blip out in the opposite direction of Ra. It's a bright light with the pinpoint clarity of a star, but obviously it's not a star since it wasn't there yesterday. Or even a few hours ago. Also, it's moving. Charlotte's taking this new development with all the grace of a garbage fire. She barged in on her hydraulic arm while I was checking Ra's radiation emissions earlier and started reciting the entire Caldwell Enterprises Emergency Preparedness Manual to me from start to finish. I took that to mean that she thinks the incoming light is a matter of some concern. I told her to be more optimistic, that it might not be coming directly toward us, that it could simply be a mirage, that she technically doesn't have a death to fear. But she just started reciting the manual all over again from the beginning. So I wedged a fallen tree branch up into the hydraulic tracks to block her from exiting the glass house. Season 1 of Girl in Space launches September 18th, 2017, with a new episode every 2 weeks. Subscribe using your favorite podcast app or stream episodes at girlinspacepodcast.com. It's all here, in space.
Books and Ideas is copyright 2019 to Virginia Campbell, MD, You can copy this show to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at docartemis@gmail.com. Theme music for Books and Ideas is The Open Door by Beatnik Turtle. Please visit their website at beatnikturtle.com.